And so you have this end goal of putting the puzzle together, but you can't get to that end goal yet. The end goal of a negotiation is maybe for Ed and Eileen to sell their house, for me to buy their house. But before we can get there, the first step is to collaborate on turning the puzzle pieces over. The skill of negotiation has easily been the most valuable thing I've learned as a real estate investor. Over the last 21 years, it's literally made me millions of dollars. The problem with negotiation is that it has this reputation of being sort of like a battle or a tug of war, where I'm on this side with my price, you're on the other side with your price, and we tug back and forth. And the quote winner of the negotiation is the stronger person, or the person who can outlast the other person and pull you towards my side to get the price that I want, and maybe meeting in the middle. The problem with that approach is that everyone leaves the battle with their egos and their emotions bruised. And so if you're someone like me, I've been investing in a small town as a small and mighty investor for 21 years, and I see the people I'm negotiating with in the grocery store. I know those people, and having a relationship with them, both before and after the negotiation, and getting referrals from them is a really important thing. And I think a lot of us as negotiators, that approach, while maybe successful sometimes in getting a good deal on a real estate investment, leaves something to be desired. So in this episode, I want to share with you an approach I've learned from others that fits my personality better, that has made me feel much better about the negotiation process, while also getting a lot of good deals and maintaining or even improving the relationship with the other person I'm negotiating with. And this approach is something called the negotiation puzzle. So to explain how the negotiation puzzle works, I want to tell you a story about one of the early properties that I bought as a very young, green, rookie investor. I was 24 years old, going on 25. And at the time, I was sending out letters to homeowners who owned properties in some neighborhoods that I liked. So one of those letters that I sent out was received by someone named Eileen and her husband, Ed. And I'll give you just some quick background on Eileen and Ed. They were both recently retired ministers in the Methodist Church. And over the years, they had owned this property, and it was their home at first, but they now owned it as a rental property. And they lived in a nearby community on a kind of retirement cottage that they had bought on a lake, on a really beautiful lake. So that was their kind of dream, to live in this retirement home. And they also owned this rental home. And so Eileen called me up and she said, I got your letter. I actually showed this to a real estate agent who was trying to get my business. And she said, you never, ever want to talk to these investors. There's never going to be a good deal. You don't want to talk to them. But she said, I looked you up on the internet and I think I want to talk to you and I'd like to get to know you. And so let's meet and let's go take a look at the house. So me as a green rookie investor, I didn't know how this thing was supposed to go. I said, okay. Eileen was one of those people who, to this day, is one of the wisest and one of the kindest people I met. But she was also someone who, on the phone, she kind of took control of the conversation and said, this is how it's going to work. And I went along with it and said, great, let's meet up and talk about your house. Now, I'm going to tell you the rest of the story and what happened with Ed and Eileen and whether I actually bought this property. But I want to pause here to go back to the idea of the negotiation puzzle. Now, we had a couple of options here. We could have started off saying, first thing, Chad, what do you want to pay for this house? First thing, Ed and Eileen, what do you want to pay for this house? And get in our corners of the battle ring and go back and forth. That could have been a way that we negotiated. But I was very fortunate that Eileen and Ed actually naturally went towards a different, more collaborative approach to a negotiation. The idea was more like doing a puzzle. So have you ever thought about when you do a puzzle and you put the jigsaw puzzle on the table and you dump out all the pieces on the table? A lot of them are turned over. You can't even see what the picture is. And so you have this end goal of putting the puzzle together, but you can't get to that end goal yet. The end goal of a negotiation is maybe for Ed and Eileen to sell their house, for me to buy their house. That's our goal. We want that to happen. But before we can get there, the first step is to collaborate on turning the puzzle pieces over. So in the negotiation world, turning the puzzle pieces over are learning information, learning stories, trying to understand what the situation is without judgment, without trying to solve the puzzle right away and going in and saying, this is what you should do, this is how it should happen, just listening. Listening is the key skill. And that's why I was so fortunate on one of those early deals is that Eileen and Ed said, hey, we're going to sit down and we're going to listen to one another. We're going to turn these puzzle pieces over. And the idea that I've developed since then is that if you can approach a negotiation as a collaboration, and not everybody's going to want to do that. Some people just want to haggle and they want to go that different route, and that's fine. But I found that many people are willing to take the approach, and the way I asked them to take the approach is, hey, I am more like a problem solver. I'm a puzzle solver. And if you're willing to just talk to me and let us tell each other our stories, maybe I can turn the puzzle pieces over and figure out a way that we can both be happy with the puzzle in the end. So that's how I frame it. I explain it as a puzzle. I didn't explain it that way to Ed and Eileen in the beginning, but it was a big lesson to me that listening to their stories, those stories they told me about why the house was so special to them, gave me the emotional information about how important this house was to them. It could have been different. It could have been, hey, I inherited this house. I've never been there in my life. I just want to get rid of it. That could have been the story, but that wasn't the story. And so I knew that any offer I make to them has to take their story in mind. Is the emotional information, and then there's the details and the facts and what they need to accomplish financially. That's, of course, an important part of the story too. So as we fast forwarded that story, I'm taking notes on all that mentally, maybe taking some physical notes as well on a piece of paper on some of the details, some of the important parts of the story, what they're trying to accomplish financially. And all of that is part of this first stage of turning over puzzle pieces. I also want to mention that I'm going to be teaching this topic of negotiation and other skills of a rental property investor in my online courses. I have one coming up called 30 Days to a Better Rental Property Investor. And every day is a different skill, a different action, a different practice to become a better real estate investor. That's coming up very soon, so be on the lookout for that. And then also my book that's coming out, The Small and Mighty Real Estate Investor. It's going to be available for pre-order very soon. I have a whole chapter on negotiation. I have other chapters on the different skills of becoming a real estate investor who can be small but mighty, who can have income coming in, who can turn that income into a passive business so that you can travel, so that you can do other things. So be on the lookout. This is a topic that I'm going to go in depth more on in courses in that book. I would love for the opportunity to be able to work with you more and help you learn that in different formats, including the book this year in 2023. So going back to Ed and Eileen and that first conversation I had with them, I started to get the outline of what a finished puzzle would look like. What's this destination or the end of their story that they're trying to get to? And a big part of that, of course, was them living in this home that they're in on the lake, sitting on the back porch, peacefully enjoying their retirement, not having anxiety and worry financially. That sleeping well at night in that picture of them on their home, that was the end destination. That was the finished puzzle. But there's a lot of variability on how to get to that end puzzle. But I did have some important pieces, some information that they had shared with me. For example, one thing, they had the idea just from talking to realtors and appraisers that the property was worth about $125,000. Now I know here we are in 2023. This was about 20 years ago. So just double that number. This equivalent property in my market in the Clemson, Easley area of South Carolina would probably be more like a $250,000 house at this point. So any of my numbers I talk about here, just go ahead and double them. So they had this idea of a certain value. They had this other idea that I've already mentioned a little bit, that they didn't want to rent the place, but they had been open to the idea of having income coming in on a regular basis. They'd already been a landlord. They just didn't like the management aspect of it. They didn't want to deal with tenants. They didn't want to deal with somebody tearing the house up and having that risk and that emotional baggage they have to deal with. So those were just other pieces of information that I got. But by the end of that conversation, I wasn't ready to solve the puzzle for them, but I had taken some notes on their situation. I'd taken some notes on the property itself, taken pictures to try to understand it so I can run the numbers for myself. And that was the whole goal of that first conversation, to turn those puzzle pieces over, to sort of get a rough outline of the puzzle, to get as much information as I could so that I could then go back home and prepare an offer, which is what I told them. I'd love to meet with you again as soon as possible, and I'd like to present an offer to you to buy your house. So that's what I did. I went home, I ran my numbers, and on a one-page piece of paper, put together a written offer. That's called a memorandum of offer, which is just a fancy term for a summary of what my offer is and the numbers and how it would work. And if they were to accept my offer, we would take the details from that and put it into a contract form to put the property under contract. So I took that memorandum of offer, I met with Ed and Eileen again, and I presented it to them. It was a $95,000 price offer where I was going to go to the bank or go to a private lender and get new financing to cash them out. And by the way, at that time in 2005, when I was negotiating this, the interest rates for an investor would probably be about 7.5% going to a bank. Or if I were to go to a private lender, which I was also doing at that time, it might have been an 8 or a 10% interest rate. And so for me to make it a good deal, for the puzzle to work for me, I had to pay a price of about $95,000. I thought I'd put about $5,000 in repairs to rent this property for $950 to $1,000. So as a rookie investor, I just ran some basic numbers, and I have other videos, by the way, now on how to run the numbers and how to analyze a deal. And so I'm not going to get into all those details in this episode, but the point was, at that point in my career, I felt like those numbers were all I could pay in order to still be able to cash flow it and pay the mortgage to a private lender or to a bank. But from Ed and Eileen's standpoint, they looked at my offer and said, we can't do that. I'm just not sure that's the best solution for us to get from point A to point B and to finish and to solve our puzzle. I think we might have better alternatives. But because we had built a good rapport, because I had listened to them, because they had listened to my story, and we had a good rapport with one another, they allowed me to present them an alternative offer, something I had been learning about as a rookie investor. I'd heard about something called seller financing and studied it a little bit. And by the way, I have other episodes and videos on seller financing. I'll put links to those in the video description or show notes if you want to learn how this works, getting financing from the seller. But the summary on this deal is I presented an offer and we went back and forth on some numbers, but I landed on an offer to them of $115,000 with $2,000 down. And so I still would owe them $113,000, and they essentially became my bank. I made payments to them, and I agreed on payments of $650 per month with a 5% interest rate. Now, looking back on this in retrospect, knowing what I know many years later, I realized that that payment was not going to be a positive cash flow. I was break even at best, renting the property for $950 or $1,000. After all my expenses, I was not making any money. But my logic at the time, I was just trying to get into the rental business. It was a very small down payment on a high quality property that was in a good location where rents hopefully would go up over time and the value would go up over time. And in retrospect, that did happen, but I wasn't making any money in cash flow in the short run. That was my perspective, but the puzzle for Ed and Eileen and the way I presented it to them was they would get the $2,000 up front, of course, and they would also get these $650 payments from me for the next 6 years. We agreed on a 6-year term for the owner financing. And so that $650 times 6 years, 12 payments per year for 6 years, is about $47,000. And at the end of that 6 years, I would owe them $98,000 approximately. So they were looking at it as we can get $145,000 or so plus the down payment from this deal with Chad. And if we were just to sell it with a realtor, we would probably net about $115,000 after commissions and closing costs and all that. And we can actually get more from getting some interest and some income from Chad and letting him solve the puzzle on the property itself. So it was a win. It got them to their destination. They could use the payment from me to make their mortgage payment. They could use that final lump sum payment to pay off their property and have some extra cash. So my solution met their end goal. It helped them solve their puzzle. And just an aside I want to point out, and the point of turning over all those puzzle pieces is when I present an offer like that, often we investors just look at the numbers. We look at the technical aspects of it, the seller financing, the down payment. But when you understand the puzzle that you're trying to solve, you can explain those numbers. You can explain that offer in terms of the story of that person's life, on how this is going to help them accomplish it. So for example, I might say this number, this $145,000 worth of price plus payments you're going to get over the next 6 years will allow you to sit on your back porch, enjoy your retirement, to not have to worry about the finances because I'm the one who's going to take care of the tenants. If the tenant tears up the property, I'm the one who's going to take care of that. And so you see, you can explain it in layman's terms. You can explain it in terms that people actually make decisions on. People don't make decisions like robots with numbers and analytics, although that's important. That's got to make sense. We make decisions emotionally, and then we justify our emotional decisions with the numbers. So lots we could talk about there, lots we could unpack, but the point is, this idea of solving a puzzle was the framework for that deal that I learned, and has been the framework for many, 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 many deals I've done since then. Many much bigger than this first property I bought, the single family house, properties that I bought for $1 million that have made me millions of dollars over time, but a very similar negotiation, a very similar seller with a problem that they want to solve, a puzzle that they want to put together. And if you as a real estate investor can figure out how to be an expert, how to understand what those pieces look like, how to present offers that have alternatives. Seller financing is one of those tools, but there's a lot of other tools that you can learn in your real estate investing toolbox that can help you solve people's puzzles. So I want to tell you the end of the story of this negotiation puzzle with Ed and Eileen. So I did buy the property under the terms that I just told you about. I moved a tenant into the property and we started making payments to Ed and Eileen every single month. So that's $650 per month. I would mail it to them. And actually a couple times I even delivered the payment in person and had a report, an investor report that I did at the time to show them what was going on with the property, what the payments were, that kind of thing. And I even had some really nice meals with Ed and Eileen on their back porch, overlooking the lake, watching the sunset, eating some good Southern food and drinking some sweet tea, enjoying good company. And they became good friends. They became mentors to me as well. And there was two aspects of this deal. I mentioned when you do a negotiation puzzle, it's got to be a good deal. For me as an investor, I got to make money on it. And I ended up selling this property to my tenant who rented it for many years. And he ended up buying it for a price of $130,000 about 6 years after I bought it. And so $130,000, remember I owed at that point, I had paid the loan down to about $98,000. So Ed and Eileen got their money, about $98,000. They got the $650 a month every single month in the meantime. And I made the spread. I made the difference between the $130,000 minus some costs and what I owed them. So it ended up being over a $20,000 profit for me, in addition to any little money that we made on a monthly basis. And so it was a good deal. It succeeded. I learned how to negotiate a seller financing deal on one of my first deals. I made some money on the deal. That was good. So in the meantime, between the time I bought the property and when I sold it, I met the person who is now my wife, and we decided we wanted to get married. Who do I know who's a minister who might be able to help us with our wedding? Of course, Eileen and Ed. Would you mind being the ministers in our wedding? And they said yes. And they met with me and Carrie and my wife, and they were the ministers in our wedding. So really a fun end to that story for me personally. And of course, not every single negotiation is going to go quite so well. Not every negotiation you're going to build such a relationship. But I want to encourage you and share this story just to show you there's a different way to negotiate. There's a way that can make you feel good about the relationships you build with people. It doesn't have to be something where you're hitting somebody over the head with a hammer and saying, here's that low price, this is what it is, take it or leave it, and being this battle negotiation. It takes more work to solve the puzzle. It takes a lot more listening. It takes this skill, I mentioned listening earlier, to remember that you have 2 ears and you have 1 mouth, and that when you're negotiating, you need to listen twice as much as you talk. Keep that in mind. That's the key skill if you want to be a puzzle solver in negotiation. And the other key skill is something that I have a goal here with this podcast to do, is to help you become an expert in the business. You have to commit to the knowledge. You got to commit to the skills of building this toolbox. Seller financing that I talked about today, there's a lot more to say about that. That's one tool in your toolbox. It's a very good tool, but there's a lot of other tools. And my goal with this podcast, the goal with the courses that I teach, is to educate you, to help you become a person who masters the practice of being a rental property investor. And if you commit to that, if you have those tools in your toolbox, if you have the skill set of being willing to listen, to turn over puzzle pieces, to negotiate with people, to ask them if they'll take a more collaborative approach, you can put together some amazing deals that make you a lot of money, to help you move your own finances forward. At the same time, you build some amazing relationships. You have people who finance properties to you who eventually become friends. Maybe they'll be the minister in your wedding, but maybe they'll also just be someone who refers other people to you to do more deals with you. Or maybe that person becomes a private lender for you. Maybe they had such a good experience with you in that transaction that when they have $100,000 sitting in their retirement account, they're willing to loan it to you because they had a good experience, because they trust you, because you were willing to help solve their problem in a way that's a little bit different than everybody else is doing. So this is just a kind of a touch of negotiation. This is a topic I want to talk about a lot more on the podcast. If you found this helpful, if you'd like to learn more about it, I would love to hear from you. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment below. Let me know if you have any questions about this particular situation, any suggestions for future episodes. Would you like to hear more about negotiation? Are there any specific topics within the negotiation world, both negotiating with sellers directly like I've done here, also negotiating with realtors and through realtors? So kind of another subsegment of the negotiation game. I would love to hear from you. Let me know what's on your mind.